The member for Central Wheatbelt.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in reply to the McGowan Labor Government's 2023-24 state budget. And in doing so, I note that it has been 10 years this year since I was elected member for Central Wheatbelt. Before that, I was the member for the agricultural region, which included all of the communities I now represent. Yes, I was only one term in the Legislative Council. Central Wheatbelt is made up of 27 local governments. A number of those local governments have multiple town sites and locales within their boundaries, so there are more than 27 places for me to be at any one time for my constituents to access me. I have been involved in politics long enough to remember the electorate as it was before the Carpenter Labor Government introduced one vote, one value to the Legislative Assembly. The consequences of those changes increased the number of seats in the LA, or the Legislative Assembly, from 57 to 59, and in the metropolitan area they went from 34 electorates to 42, and in regional Western Australia we went from 23 down to 17. The electorate of Central Wheatbelt was created at that 2008 state election, and it merged the electorates of the Avon in the west and Merredin in the east. And in all the discussion about how fair and just one vote, one value is from those opposite, an ideological and political cover for the Labor Party, what is lost is how much more difficult it is for constituents to access their MPs in these very large electorates on a regular basis so that we can effectively do the job. It saddens me that 10 years on from becoming their local Member of Parliament and nearly 15 since I was elected, that we are once again having to deal with the consequences of the Labor Party reducing representation of regional people in our state parliament. That is the Labor Party's legacy. Ideology above all else. I work hard to make sure my constituents get the best representation possible. That's my job, and I love it. But electoral reform is not about the impact on the MP. It is about the impact on constituents, voters, taxpayers, vulnerable people, people with ideas to take the state forward, people investing their own hard-earned dollars, ultimately benefiting the state. 7 years into this government, and there is disillusionment setting in, that without the cover of COVID, the cracks are showing, and the questions that I am asked in my constituency and as I travel around the state about the Premier and the government's agenda and behaviour are becoming more pointed. Big promises made about housing. So how is it that we don't have housing for our most vulnerable? Big promises about looking after public servants. So how is it that we don't have housing for our essential workers, police and teachers and nurses? And our police are leaving in droves. Big promises about revitalising our energy economy. So how is it that we in the Central Wheatbelt don't have reliable power? How is it that we don't have reliable telecommunications? Because they don't deliver. A big spending Transport Minister, yet how is it that the main highway in and out of the state, the Great Eastern Highway, is crumbling away, leaving us at risk every time we get in the car or behind the wheel of a truck? So my 10-year anniversary as member for Central Wheatbelt has caused me to go back to the budget reply speech that I delivered in 2013. It was before I was a cabinet minister. I was just newly elected into the Assembly, and at that time, that election, we'd seen a very big swing to the Barnett government, and the performance of the Labor Party at that election wasn't so crash hot. I say this only to point out that to the many members who have only enjoyed the upside of government, need to remember that the electorate can and will turn. And you'll recognise the turn. An arrogant and grumpy Premier. Problems in portfolios emerging to derail the good news agenda of the government. Restless troops on the backbench with nowhere to go unless there's a changing of the guard at the top, and it does start to bite. And I don't say this with malice or as threat, I'm just pointing out that as students of politics will know, governments get tired and grumpy and arrogant. They get tired of justifying and defending, answering questions when they think everybody in the electorate should just be grateful for all the hard work that they're putting in. It's just a matter of fact. So if I go back to 2013 and my electorate, there was good news to be shared by our government, in stark contrast to what I've gleaned from this year's budget. The highlights in 2013-14 for the Central Wheatbelt: a massive $300 million package for agriculture to be invested over 5 years, the biggest spend in country health through the Southern Inland Health Initiative ever ever transforming health services and infrastructure and laying the foundation for new and improved ways of delivering health services in our region. Funding to support the Central East Aged Care Alliance, which is a group of 11 Wheatbelt shires, to improve affordable housing for seniors in those communities. Funding to support the Rural Generalist Pathway. Everyone's heard me talk about the Quairading Shire having to find $1 million to attract a doctor in this house, to support the training of junior doctors in regional areas. There were increases to subsidy rates for PATs, especially those for accessing treatment to cancer and our seniors and those living with a disability. There was funding for the Emergency Services Volunteer Fuel Card, which was cut in half when this government came to power. There was an $8 million investment in the Northam Senior High School off the back of the completion of a trade training centre the year before and the completion of a brand new Merredon Residential College in the previous 4 years. And that created in Northam a new multi-purpose performing arts centre, which I'm sure the member for Mandurah has visited and understands just how magnificent it is. There was 10 great acoustics. I'm sure you tested them out. 10 million for upgrades to the accommodation and infrastructure at Muresk Institute, our preeminent agricultural education tertiary facility, and there was funding to support our local governments to upgrade their swimming pools, which is essential infrastructure that is a constant and significant drain on local government finances, but so very necessary if you live in regional WA. There was much more, but that was specifically benefiting the Central Wheatbelt. And there was a buoyancy in the electorate. Communities back then understood the pathway to royalties for regions, for infrastructure and projects and services that would help their communities thrive and not survive. In the second term of our government, we had shifted from a deficit funding model with that Royalties for Regions program, where we were plugging the holes from the Carpenter, Ripper, Gallop governments, and trying then to shift that into an evolving forward-looking program where you actually challenge service and infrastructure delivery, partner with the private sector to think outside the square to deliver those perennially difficult services and infrastructure into sparsely populated areas in regional Western Australia. I said before, 27 local governments, very small populations, 100,000 square kilometres in size, but according to the Minister for Education and Aboriginal Affairs, we're all very close to Perth. I'll remember that when I'm out in Southern Cross, halfway to Kalgoorlie, next time I speak to my constituents. It is difficult, but not impossible, if you've got the will to deliver the services and infrastructure that we deserve. Health and aged care and childcare and education, community services, educating about changes that will ultimately be to the benefit of the whole of Western Australia, but not if we actually don't reach out and talk to the people that it will impact the most. The only real interface that the public have now with Royalties for Regions is through the regional economic development grants, and that is essentially what the development commissions have been tasked with. So gone is the trust that our government placed in development commissions and local governments and decision makers that worked and lived in these areas. It's a government that has centralised all of its control and its spending, and it's certainly not benefiting my electorate in Central Wheatbelt. And that is not to cast aspersions on the people in those development commissions. They are good people, but the government hasn't let them loose on actually delivering on their behalf. I attended the state budget briefing held in Northern the day after the budget, presented by the Minister for Communities and Early Childhood. I'm going to get them wrong, but it's the Honourable Sabine Winton came out to Northam, and I appreciate that the Minister took time to visit the electorate, but I do think that she drew the short straw on where she was sent, and that's not a reflection on my amazing community. It's because there was really very little to announce, and I'm wondering whether it's, are you the newest minister? You get to go to the place where there's nothing to talk about. Perhaps that's the way it works in the McGowan government, because it's an interesting Labor strategy, Minister. Well, there you go. It's an interesting Labor strategy, and I'm sure that's what it is, to starve the electorates. They think. That's right, but you weren't talking about the budget or anything in it, were you? Were you? I think it's a very interesting Labor strategy, and I'm sure that's what it is, to starve the electorates they think they have no stake in. However, the members for the agricultural region, the Honourable Darren West, Shelley Payne and Sandra Carr, are all government representatives for this electorate, and I understand it when the Premier says ignore the local MP when they're from the opposition, but in the same breath he is actually throwing his own members under the bus, and people know. They know. These MPs have to have awkward conversations about live export, about access to power, about telecommunications, about water charges, about housing and the lack of investment that they see in the Wheatbelt from the Department of Housing. They are clearly failing to make the case in their own caucus. These MPs claim they have the ear of the Premier and government ministers, but if they do, it's falling on deaf ears. Either way, the electorate knows that Labor is no friend of regional WA or their communities. So what should have been in the budget for the Central Wheatbelt? I'm starting with power. I'm going to have another go at this tomorrow when I do a grievance. A commitment to support the transition for our edge-of-grid communities, so the Beacons, the Ben Cubbins, the Muck and Buttons, Queriting, those with regular brown and blackouts, helping them to get a more reliable service. The Minister continues to make promises, made a big show of going out to Queriting, working with New Rock. Nothing has changed. An investment in turbocharging Western Power's capacity to connect new projects to power, and this is what I will raise tomorrow with the Minister, is exactly what we need to see. And the member for Vass was quite right. We will keep asking those questions because I've got history with this Minister, that he says one thing and then doesn't follow up and doesn't deliver. I welcome the commitment for additional funds for GROW and social housing, but the question is where these houses will land. And I'm happy to be corrected by the Minister, but as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been one extra social house delivered in the electorate of, Central Wheatbelt or GROW house delivered to the electorate. And I want to give you some examples of why this challenge presents so much of a problem for my constituents who are desperate to see these social houses built or purchased in the electorate. So I won't give you their names because that would be disclosing unfairly people's across their privacy. But I can tell you this is a couple who both work, 58 and 62 years old. They've been renting since 2017 with the same landlord. However, their house has now been sold and they will be homeless as of the 17th of June. They're not eligible for the Department of Communities Housing as they earn too much, and there are no rentals in Northam. They can't move in with family in Northam as there is no room. She works as a cleaner in a primary school and he works for a shire, not necessarily in Northam. Neighbouring towns have a one-bedroom unit, however, it has asbestos and they are not comfortable living there. There is a gentleman that came into my office. He is currently living in his car. He was told the Department of Community Housing waitlist would be 5 years and he can't access a private rental. A 69-year-old male sold his house due to issues with his neighbour. He lost money on the sale. He has no money to buy a house. There isn't one to buy. He's currently couch surfing, and he said to me that he will not put himself on the wait list, even though we've urged him to do that, because he will be dead within 5 years, and that's how long he was told the wait list was. There is a male with his wife and his wife's carer, late 60s. Their prior rental has been condemned. There is no housing available with the Department of Communities and they can't access the private rental market. Both diabetic, husband has a heart condition, they've had to store furnishings, so they have nowhere to store their furnishings, so they've sold what they can and they're currently couch surfing. And I also have a single mum who has escaped domestic violence, 3 young kids. Her partner is in the southwest. She has been forced to move back to somewhere in my electorate, and she needs to be able to be, because she's in breach of family court orders, she needs to be close to where her partner is, despite what she's been through. And she's desperate to get back to stable housing for the kids so they can have their father in their lives and that she's not breaching family court orders. She cannot do that. We've helped her to get on the priority list. I was devastated when she sent me a message saying, "I'm so grateful for your help. They've told me I might have a house in 2 years." I mean, it's just, honestly, the big announcements that we see from this government, the lack of delivery, this is what it looks like for those families. This is what it looks like. It's simply not good enough. Likewise, I'm welcoming the funding to partner with community housing providers in regional Western Australia. That's 100 new houses to support those sleeping rough in our country towns. I have stood in this place and advocated for Avon Community Services over the years. They provide supported and unsupported housing service in the Wheatbelt, but like so many of these community housings, they are struggling to meet demand. And their supported living units, or their house that they have for 18 to 25-year-olds, they've got 20 people waiting to go in. They can't shift the people that are in there out, even though they're ready to transition, because there is nowhere for them to go. So we then have this wait list, and I'd say that is small in comparison to the real demand that they are aware of, that have no capacity to engage and then get them on a pathway to actually coming into the home ownership or stable housing. So I'm very keen to know from the Housing Minister whether or not Avon Community Services will be provided access to this funding, and will there be funding then, in addition to purchasing those houses or rentals, for the wraparound supports that we know are needed when the community housing organisation is successful. When it comes to grow housing, well known in my part of the world that the nurses' quarters are some of the worst in the state. Towns like Wildcatcham, you know, it's literally the dark ages. We're living in little single dormitories, shared bathrooms, if you're lucky. It is actually having an impact on the ability of WACS to attract and retain nurses into these communities. The answer from the government is to turn around to the local government. This is a local government, I think there's about 350 people in town. I mean, their rate base is not significant, and say, if you build, we'll give you some rent for some of it. But what happens is that then that housing stock falls out of the purview of the Department of Housing, and the community is left without a tenant or the ability to pay the full loan out. And they have to borrow, which impacts their ratios as well. And so it's a no-win situation. They want to be able to support the hospital that's in town. They want to be able to attract and retain staff, but they actually don't have the capacity, and they're being asked to do something that is actually the state government's responsibility. And they need better. They need better. And it's not just Wildcatcham, there are other communities that have been involved. I have another one in relation to a solution for the Minister for Housing and the Department of Housing. And this was raised in front of the Honourable Darren West at a recent forum we had in Northam at Murest, the Wheatbelt Futures Forum. The Avon Community Development Foundation, ACDF, has very successfully built a number of homes for executives. May I have an extension, please? In Northam. They've done the project, delivered it. We provided them with funding when we were in government. They have land. They have the capacity to fund more houses. There is an encumbrance on their title. They need the Department of Housing to remove it so they can become financially bankable, and then they can get to and actually help the Minister for Housing deliver the houses he wants to get on the ground. And this has been an ongoing conversation for over 12 months. Really simple to fix. Don't know why it hasn't been done. There you go, solution. We can get additional houses on the ground in Northern where there's no rentals and no housing stock tomorrow if the Minister tells the Department of Housing and Communities, get rid of the encumbrance on the title and let them go. I also have and was looking for funding for the Cunderdin Agricultural College. Now, this is an exceptional college. They've done some amazing things. We invested significantly when we were in government, but there has been very little since we left government. And I understand that there have been numerous business cases put forward by the Department of Education on behalf of Cunderdin Agricultural College for upgrades to the residential accommodation for the students, also for the staff when you've got 3 staff sharing one house, not ideal. They need an expansion of their workshop. I think there's some work that's needed at the piggery, and there's a number of other projects. It has not been successful in the past. There is a line in the budget for agricultural colleges. I heard the member for Warren Blackwood talking about the funding that's going to her electorate, so it's known where that funding is going to land. I would very much like to know if Cunderdin Agricultural College has finally been successful in their application for funding, and I hope the Minister for Education is listening. Likewise, Northam Senior High School, I come back to it. We've spoken in this House about violence in schools. It's been on the front page of the paper. They desperately need funding to put a fence around the perimeter of their school. They regularly have incursion from outside, parents, friends, family coming onto the school property unknown and unfortunately causing some fairly unruly behaviour and putting staff and students at risk. I'm not making this up. It is absolutely a necessity. They need some support to access funding to put a perimeter fence around their school. I've got 10 minutes left and I've got a little bit to get through. So, roads. Great Eastern Highway. Last night, while I'm sitting putting the final touches on my, my budget contribution, I get an email which summed it up perfectly. It's from Peter, and he said, "Hi Mia, last night I saw Adam Papalia," I'm presuming that's the Minister for the Minister for Police, but I'm happy to be corrected, saying that WA has good quality roads, and I'm quoting from the email. "He obviously has not travelled the Great Eastern Highway lately. Since moving back to the country, I have seen firsthand how poor the main east-west artery has become, and travelling along it on the weekend has led me to email you. There is not one overtaking lane travelling east between Northam and Barndee. I was in a train of approximately 16 vehicles trailing an oversized load, including road trains, for more than 20 kilometres with speeds down to 80 kilometres per hour at times. To me, this is an accident waiting to happen, with drivers becoming frustrated and overtaking at inappropriate times. There has been a massive increase in both road trains and oversized loads since I moved 10 years ago. I believe, apart from improving the quality of the Great Eastern Highway, the input of at least 3 overtaking lanes is of utmost importance for the safety of our country drivers who use the road generally on frequent occasions." I can absolutely agree. There's been some work done on the northern. No, but I've limited time, and I think anybody that travels on Great Eastern Highway, there has been some work done, and I'll concede that there has been some funding, but that's on the northern Perth side. Once you get past Northam, out to Merredin, and then across, and then there's the Walgoolan section.
One in Merredin, one in Southern Cross.
Yeah.
Highway.
Yeah, and the Walgoolan, that's been delayed.
Regional road safety investment, yeah. Keep going.
Finish. I'm talking about between Northam and Merredin. So we had to fight a long time to get the funding that you're talking about, Minister, for the Walgoolan section of the Great Eastern Highway. That is incredibly dangerous. People have lost their lives out there. This section that this gentleman's talking about is the section between Northam and Merredin, where there are, I think, maybe 1 overtaking lane. And it is good line of sight, but the road is skinny and there is significant road traffic, and it does on a regular occurrence scare the living daylights out of me when I see just people tearing up the wrong side of the road to get past the bank of trucks, as Peter has said to me. I would really like to see some prioritisation of our major east-west highway in and out of the state so that we don't see any fatalities on that road or serious accidents. In addition to that, passive rail crossings, and quite frankly I was disappointed that the Minister for Transport was very dismissive of my question regarding funding for upgrades to make passive rail crossings safer, especially in regional WA. The Jensen, the Broad and the Smith families and their friends and colleagues have been campaigning for over 20 years, and I've spoken about this in this chamber on a number of occasions. They actually lost their loved ones at a rail crossing in the electorate of Central Wheatbelt, and it has forever changed their lives. And credit to them, they have persistently worked with both every government and every organisation that has an interface in terms of trying to improve the safety at these crossings. And the bare minimum that they are asking for from the Minister is to replace the give way signs at these passive rail crossings with stop signs. I can't imagine that's going to break the bank. But they also want to know what funds are going to be allocated to unlock the federal funding that's been made available. And that was really the question. Is that funding there? There is a line item. We're seeking answers from the Minister about how that's going to be applied, what priority that's being given, and how we will then go about prioritising which passive rail crossings will be dealt with first. So it was an opportunity for the Minister to actually give some hope to these communities and their constituents. Unfortunately, that's not what we left after that question the other day. Finally, I am disappointed once again that there has been no indexation of the country age pension fuel card. We have limited, very limited public transport in my electorate. We have the Avon Link, the Merredin Link, the Prospector, some very infrequent Trans-WA buses. Very limited transport between communities and almost none within. If you live in Northam, there is a taxi service, but that's expensive and not something that a lot of people can afford. We certainly don't have that transport between communities that is necessary for many in my towns. It is a lifesaver for many of our pensioners on fixed incomes. I did say last week that this was an opportunity for the government to index it. It hasn't been since you've been in government, and there was also the service charge that gets applied by vendors, and this was another thing that the government should have shown some generosity on, as it did for the metropolitan public transport users, for those that are receiving the country age pension fuel card. They would get nothing but credit and kudos if they went down that path. So as I stated from the outset, I was pretty disappointed as a local member with this budget. Central Wheatbelt, 27 local governments, my vibrant little communities, they are a special part of the state. I was pretty horrified by the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs' response, and I hope that's not more broadly the way that the Cabinet and people and the Labor Party think about the Wheatbelt, which is you're pretty close to Perth, so you can all drive if you need to educate yourself on a major reform that this government is bringing in. Yet we have landowners, local governments, significant stakeholders that want to do the right thing and are being denied that opportunity close to home. Flies in the face of decentralised government and thinking, and quite frankly, I hope the Minister goes away, has a think about it and comes back and says we got that wrong. I'm not holding my breath. We produce food, minerals, we are a destination for tourists, we have renewable energy on a significant scale, yet we also have families that are struggling, a lack of housing for essential workers, a lack of investment in land development and essential infrastructure. I have outlined some of the issues that I was hoping the government would address in the budget. There's still an opportunity for that to be cleared up as we go through estimates, and I'm hopeful that there will be some more as people get out and about and the ministers want to talk a little bit more about the detail of the budget. But I fear that we have been left with very little, and there's certainly no major announcements for the Wheatbelt that I can see. I just want to finish off on a different note. As we respond to this budget, there is a national debate taking place on The Voice, and I have put on record my support for The Voice. I know there are concerns in the community, and it is right to have this debate. It is a significant issue that deserves debate. We have a responsibility as lawmakers, as leaders in our community, to engage in respectful debate, to lead where there is where it is difficult to forge a path. There is no risk to our nation to recognise the people that have lived and loved this land for many thousands of years in our Constitution. It is the right thing to do. There is no risk in including a clause that there shall be a pathway for these people to raise issues with the Parliament and for governments to seek advice on policy and issues that will impact them and our future as a nation. Because mark my words, our future success as a nation is intrinsically linked to the fortunes of our Aboriginal friends, family and colleagues. At the very least, to those that would take a purely economic view, all the evidence is that engaging with Aboriginal people to design and deliver funding and services for Aboriginal people gets a better outcome for the taxpayer dollar, and there is your reason to say yes. For those that say it divides a nation, I invite you to read the stories of Veronica Yaron Maguire, Sue Bennell, Charlie Dick, Darren Grassick, Trevor and Frank Davis, Brenda Diatta, Ian Rivers, Joan Hill, Matthew Jackman and Aya Dannon in the latest publication of The Humans of the Wheatbelt. In their lifetime, not some distant past, they have experienced division. Economic, social and physical. They are elders and upcoming leaders, community members, mothers, fathers, aunties and uncles. I don't know where they stand on The Voice, but they will have their opportunity, like everyone else, to have their say when the referendum date is set. For me, The Voice is about acknowledging our past. We can't change that. Acknowledging that what we do now is not working. We can change that. And honouring those that have been harmed as a result of failed policy by working to create a different future together. Please read these stories and understand that the division exists in our nation already, and The Voice is about reconciliation and a chance for us all to come together.